who was Ulysses S. Grant? I mean, besides the Civil War hero who brought a victory for the North or the 18th President of the United States, is he really all that important? Well, for many years, history regarded him as one of the worst presidents to ever be in office. However, just recently, a new light has been shown on the man. Hiram Ulysses Grant was born on April 27, 1822. Grant never found any interest in the environment he was born in, other than an excellence in horsemanship, so his father enlisted him into the United States Army. Upon arrival, Hiram found that there was no one signed up under the name of Hiram Grant. However, there was a U.S. Grant, and seizing the opportunity given to him, he then and there changed his name. It was here that the name Ulysses S. Grant was born. After graduating from training, Ulysses would go on to serve in the Mexican-American War. In his spare time, Grant would study tactics used by generals. Here he learned vital information and strategies that would later be put to use during his time serving in the Civil War. Soon after, he began an interest in Julia Dent, a sister to a friend he met while stationed, and the two quickly fell in love. In 1844, she accepted his marriage proposal. After resigning from the military, Ulysses, with Julia and their son, Fred, moved from place to place, never landing a stable job. And then, everything changed. The nation was divided, split into two, and the two sides were in arms with each other. A national crisis. Grant decided to rejoin the military. He knew he had to fight for what he thought was right, and so he did. As battlefield commander, he won the Union's first major victory by capturing Fort Donelson. Working from there, he defended a Confederate surprise attack in the Battle of Shiloh, inside of Tennessee. And then, after capturing Vicksburg, a major key city in Mississippi, President Lincoln appointed Grant as Lieutenant General. He would now be commander of all U.S. armies, a position of which had never been held other than the likes of George Washington. Grant now commanded all of the Union's armies, and his largest priority was capturing Robert E. Lee, the Confederate Army's top commander. The Civil War was divided by two fronts, the Western Theater and the Eastern Theater. Grant was in the Western Theater. He was dismantling the South, and Robert E. Lee in the Eastern Theater, doing the same to the North. Once Grant was promoted, he moved his focus on capturing Richmond, the Confederate capital, and with it, Robert E. Lee. It was now the best of both sides pitted against each other, and the fate of the Union depended on the outcome. After a stalemate of 3 battles, both sides losing upwards of tens of thousands, Grant decides to flank Richmond, attacking Petersburg, the last standing railway port sending food and supplies to Lee's army. Not only did this cut off all supplies from Lee's army, practically starving his men out, it also prevented him from being able to escape. Robert E. Lee surrendered on April 9, 1865. 6 days following, Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth. Someone needed to continue the torch held by Lincoln, and Grant stepped up to fulfill that duty. By next election, Ulysses won presidency by a landslide. Once he got into office, he was hit with a wave of problems. Reconstruction in the South, the newly rising Ku Klux Klan, granting civil rights to freed slaves, keeping the Union together and reconnecting the South to the Union, the threats of a second war, the list goes on. One of the hardest struggles was taking on the daunting task of Reconstruction in the South. The entire bottom half of the nation was in ruins, and the revival of the South seemed far from possible. After years of trying to rebuild the South and sending federal troops down to organize, public opinion grew less and less on his side. By the time he left office, little progress was done. However, not all was in vain. In doing so, Grant did successfully remove any threats of a second civil war, and he did extend and strengthen the bonds of the Union. As tension increased between the North and the South due to issues with Reconstruction, a white supremacist group called the Ku Klux Klan emerged that united to re-adopt pro-slavery ideas. Despite popular opinion, Grant sent federal troops into southern states to stop the Ku Klux Klan. There were high risks of provoking the South while doing this, and the temptations for a second civil war were the least of Grant's desires. However, even with the risks, President Grant interfered and wiped out the KKK in 1872. Another issue deep on his list of priorities was to cease the tensions between Native Americans and U.S. settlers. He proposed large reservations for them with absolute protection. On top of that, he did everything in his power to extend full equality to freed slaves. On the day of his inauguration, Grant promoted the idea of a 15th Amendment. This would grant all male citizens the right to vote, no matter of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Ulysses S. Grant had also signed the Civil Rights Act, which was aimed to end segregation in public areas. However, it was eventually overruled by the Supreme Court. Alongside that, he had signed the Enforcement Acts, which was meant to protect the voting rights of blacks in the old Confederacy. Ulysses S. Grant left office in 1877. After unknowingly partnering with a corrupted scandal for business, Grant and his family were left bankrupt. One day, a man named Mark Twain approached him with an idea that would help pull Grant's family out of poverty. Grant's views, now being one of, if not the most famous American of his time, on the Civil War in America would be successful if published. He accepted the proposal and started writing his memoir. However, shortly after he started writing, something terrible happened. After taking a bite out of a peach, Grant discovered he had throat cancer. He visited the doctor and it was found that it would be fatal. For months, Grant fought against one of the worst pains, rushing to release his writing to generate money for his family. He said that even drinking a glass of water was as painful as drinking molten lead. For the last few weeks of his life, Ulysses practically willed himself to keep living, racing to get his writing done in time. Just 3 days after he wrote the last page, he died. The date was July 23, 1889. His writing grew monumental success, generating over $500,000 for his family, which in today's money would be much, much more. Cities all across the nation had street gatherings to mourn the death of Ulysses S. Grant. The life of Ulysses S. Grant may now not be remembered, but is assured that he is one of the most pivotal people in world history. Although his reputation may be tarnished and forgotten by Confederate writings or lost to history itself, Grant did some of the largest acts for the country of the United States. As a young boy first picking up a rifle, as a man leading his first battle, as president, Grant fought valiantly for equal rights, a better country. Grant was a true patriot with one of the strongest of merits. If it were not for his leadership during the Civil War, the Union would be lost. If it were not for his acts as President of the United States of America, equal rights would be lost. If it were not for Grant, America would be lost. Who was Ulysses S. Grant? Well, the next time you see this question, take pride in knowing a man who came from hardship and poverty and went down fighting for his family and for his country, and be inspired to do the same.